In 1941, Europe was deep in the middle of World War II. Tensions were building between Germany and the Soviet Union, leading to one of the most famous battles ever, the Battle of Stalingrad. Before the battle started, Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, had been pretty successful in Europe. The German army was considered really powerful, quickly taking over lots of countries. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, was worried. Even though Germany and the Soviet Union had a non-aggression pact, which meant they agreed not to fight each other, distrust was a big issue. The city of Stalingrad was important because it was a major industrial city in the Soviet Union. It was named after Stalin, so it held symbolic value too. Germany wanted to capture Stalingrad, not just to weaken the Soviet industry, but also to boost German morale by taking a city named after Stalin. The key players were Adolf Hitler for Germany and Joseph Stalin for the Soviet Union. Hitler wanted to expand Germany's reach and resources by going east. Stalin, on the other hand, was determined to push back against the German advances and protect the Soviet Union from being overrun. At the beginning, the German army made a plan called Operation Barbarossa. This was a huge military operation aimed at invading the Soviet Union and capturing cities, including Stalingrad. The operation started in June 1941, with German soldiers moving fast and capturing vast amounts of land. But capturing Stalingrad was not going to be easy. The Soviets mounted a strong defense. The city turned into a battlefield, with soldiers fighting on the streets and in buildings. One of the well-known things about the battle was how close and brutal the combat was. Soldiers fought house to house, and even room to room. In technical terms, the Germans used powerful tanks, airplanes, and artillery to try to break the Soviet defense. Artillery means big guns that can shoot long distances, and they caused a lot of destruction in the city. The Soviets, however, had their own weapons and knew the city well, which helped them hold their ground. One major challenge for both sides was the brutal winter. Temperatures dropped way low, sometimes reaching -40 degrees Fahrenheit. This made it hard for soldiers to stay warm and affected the performance of vehicles and weapons. Supplies for food and fuel ran short as well, making it difficult to continue fighting. By November 1942, the tide began to turn. The Soviets launched a counterattack named Operation Uranus. They surrounded the German army in Stalingrad, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. It became clear the Germans were stuck, and after months of fighting, they were forced to surrender in February 1943. The result of the Battle of Stalingrad was a huge turning point in World War II. It was one of the first major defeats for Germany and boosted the confidence of the Allies, including the United States and the United Kingdom. It also marked the beginning of the Soviet push westward, ultimately leading to the fall of Berlin in 1945. So, why does this all matter today? The Battle of Stalingrad showed the impact of strategy, persistence, and the human spirit in overcoming challenges. It reminded the world of the cost of war and the importance of peace. It also showed how important it is to understand history, so the mistakes of the past are not repeated. This story of courage and strategy is still studied today, teaching lessons about leadership and decision-making in difficult times. In the summer of 1941, a massive event changed the course of World War II. It was called Operation Barbarossa, and it was when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. This was not just any military campaign. It was a huge leap in Adolf Hitler's plan to conquer more territory and spread his ideas. This story is about that invasion, the people involved, and why it still matters today. Leading up to Operation Barbarossa, Europe was already in chaos. Germany had invaded many countries, including Poland, France, and Denmark. Hitler wanted even more land, especially in the east, where there were vast resources like oil and food. He thought the Soviet Union would be easy to defeat and wanted to do it quickly. Two of the key people in this story were Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany, and Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union. Hitler was known for his aggressive military strategies, and Stalin was known for his strict control over the Soviet Union. Both men underestimated each other, and that would play a big role in what happened next. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. This meant sending more than 3 million German soldiers into the Soviet Union. They were joined by soldiers from Italy, Romania, Hungary, and other countries who supported Germany. The attack was massive and had three main groups, one aimed at the north towards Leningrad, another in the center towards Moscow, and the third in the south towards Ukraine. These groups were backed by tanks, planes, and artillery, all working together to push through the Soviet defenses. German armies used a tactic called blitzkrieg, which means lightning war in German. It was about moving fast and striking hard. Tanks and planes would break through enemy lines, causing confusion. Then infantry, the soldiers on foot, would come in to take control. The Soviet Union was caught off guard. Many troops were not prepared, and communication was poor. It looked like Germany might be successful, but things did not go as smoothly as planned. The Soviet Union's land was vast and difficult to navigate. Roads often turned to mud, and the weather was unpredictable. As the Germans moved deeper into Soviet territory, their supply lines became stretched and vulnerable. It was tough to get enough food, fuel, and medical supplies to their soldiers. The Soviet Union also had more troops than the Germans expected. As the Germans moved forward, Stalin ordered his people to fight back with everything they had. Factories were moved east to build more weapons, and civilians were called to join in the defense. Soviet soldiers and civilians showed incredible bravery, often fighting in harsh conditions. By December 1941, Germany had reached the outskirts of Moscow, but they could not capture it. Cold weather set in, with temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Celsius, and the Germans were not prepared for such a harsh winter. Their progress stalled, and Soviet forces began to push them back. Operation Barbarossa was a turning point in World War II. It opened up a massive eastern front, which meant Germany now had to fight a war on two fronts. This stretched their resources thin and made things more challenging. This operation is important today because it shows the impact of underestimating an opponent and the difficulties of warfare in extreme conditions. It also explains how World War II expanded and became even more complex. Understanding these events helps us learn from the past to better handle conflicts in the present and future. In 1942, World War II was raging across Europe. Adolf Hitler had set his sights on the Soviet Union, aiming to capture the city of Stalingrad. This city was important because it seemed like a stepping stone to the oil-rich regions of the Soviet Union's south. But it was not just about oil. For both sides, Stalingrad represented prestige and power. The city was named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, making it a symbolic target for the Germans. Key people involved in the Battle of Stalingrad included Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany, and Joseph Stalin, leading the Soviet Union. On the battlefield, German General Friedrich Paulus was given the task to lead the attack on Stalingrad. On the Soviet side, General Vasily Chuikov was entrusted with defending the city. Both commanders faced immense pressures and had to make tough decisions. The assault on Stalingrad started in the summer of 1942. German troops advanced quickly at first, overwhelming the Soviet defenses. The Germans used a strategy called blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. This strategy focused on fast and powerful attacks to break through enemy lines. They had tanks, airplanes, and well-trained soldiers that made this approach effective. As the German planes bombed the city, buildings crumbled and smoke filled the air. Still, the Soviet defenders did not give up. They used every corner, basement, and building as a stronghold to fight back. This fighting style is known as urban warfare. Soldiers faced each other in close, brutal battles. The city became a maze of rubble where every street and house saw intense fighting. One major problem both sides faced was the harsh weather. As 1942 turned into winter, temperatures dropped below freezing. German soldiers were not prepared for the cold and lacked the proper clothing and supplies. On the other hand, the Soviet soldiers were more used to the winter and they took advantage of it. Snow and ice made it difficult for tanks and vehicles to move smoothly, turning every plan into a struggle. The Soviet Union also used a clever tactic called hugging. They stayed very close to the German soldiers, minimizing the effectiveness of German artillery and air attacks. In November 1942, the Soviets launched a significant counteroffensive known as Operation Uranus. They surrounded the German Sixth Army, trapping thousands of German soldiers inside Stalingrad. After months of fighting, the Germans were exhausted and running out of supplies. By February 1943, General Paulus had no choice but to surrender. This defeat marked a major turning point in the war. The once unstoppable German army had been forced to retreat, and more importantly, the Soviet Union began to push the Germans back towards Germany. The results of the Battle of Stalingrad were far-reaching. The German army lost many soldiers and resources, weakening their position in the war. It also boosted the morale of the Soviet Union and its allies. Stalingrad proved that Hitler's forces could be defeated and shifted the momentum of the war in favor of the Allies. So, why should we care about this today? The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the first major defeats for Nazi Germany, showing that even the strongest armies can be stopped. It taught valuable lessons about resilience and strategy that are still studied in military schools today. Remembering these events helps us understand the impacts of war and the importance of peace and diplomacy in solving conflicts. In 1942, World War II was in full swing. Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, had expanded across Europe. He wanted to capture the Soviet Union's city of Stalingrad because it was a key industrial center and had a strategic location on the Volga River. Stalingrad was also named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, so taking it was a symbolic move for the Germans. The battle drew in two main commanders, Friedrich Paulus for the Germans and Vasily Chuikov for the Soviet Union. Paulus led the German Sixth Army, confident they would take the city quickly. Chuikov, on the other hand, was in charge of defending Stalingrad. Known for his tough attitude, he planned to fight to the very last building. As the German army approached in August 1942, their first move was heavy bombing from the air. The bombings turned Stalingrad into a chaotic mess of rubble. It was hard to tell where streets used to be, which made progress slow for the Germans. They expected a quick victory, but instead faced stubborn resistance from the Soviet troops. The fighting turned into street-by-street combat. This kind of warfare is called urban combat, and it's different because everything happens up close. Soldiers aren't just worried about the enemy in front of them. They have to check every corner, building, window, and door. It becomes super intense, with sniper shots and hand-to-hand fighting. The Germans had powerful tanks and guns, but these were less effective in the tight and tricky streets. Key battles took place at locations like Mamayev Kurgan, a big hill, and the tractor factory, which made tanks. Each location became a fortress. Forces dug in and fortified their positions, turning every place into a little war zone of its own. The Soviet tactic was simple: hold on at all costs, and make the Germans fight for every inch. Both sides faced major challenges. The Germans had stretched their supply lines too thin, making it hard to get new supplies and reinforcements. The Soviets faced a shortage of weapons and ammunition. But they had one advantage. The Soviets were used to the cold weather, while the Germans weren't prepared for the harsh Russian winter that came in late 1942. The situation for the Germans got worse when the Soviets launched Operation Uranus in November. It was a surprise attack that encircled the German Sixth Army in Stalingrad. This trapped the Germans without enough food or supplies. Hitler ordered his men to stay put and not to surrender. By February 1943, the German troops were exhausted and starving. Friedrich Paulus finally surrendered, and this marked the first major defeat for Hitler's forces in World War II. It was a turning point in the war because it destroyed a whole German army and lifted Soviet morale. So, why does all of this matter today? The Battle of Stalingrad was crucial because it changed the direction of World War II. Before this, the Germans seemed unstoppable, but after losing at Stalingrad, they were mainly on the defensive. It showed the strength and resilience of the Soviet forces and became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. This battle teaches us about determination and how leadership, strategy, and perseverance can change the outcome of even the toughest situations. In 1942, things looked grim for the Soviet Union. The German army, led by Adolf Hitler, had launched a massive invasion called Operation Barbarossa the year before. By the summer of 1942, German forces had reached the city of Stalingrad, a crucial industrial hub on the Volga River. Capturing Stalingrad was key for the Germans because it would cut off the Soviet Union's transport routes and give Germany control of important oil fields in the Caucasus. The battle for Stalingrad started in July 1942, and it was intense. The Soviets, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, were determined to defend the city that bore his name. The fight raged on from the summer into the cold winter months, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. But amidst the chaos, some key figures emerged who would play crucial roles in changing the tide. General Vasily Chuikov was one of those people. He was a tough Soviet commander who took charge of the 62nd Army. His job was to hold on to Stalingrad at any cost, and he was known for his gritty, no-nonsense approach. Meanwhile, General Georgy Zhukov, another top Soviet commander, was one of the architects of a bold plan to turn things around. The Soviet Union's plan was to launch a counteroffensive called Operation Uranus in November 1942. This wasn't just a simple attack, it was a massive strategic move. The goal was to surround and trap the German Sixth Army inside Stalingrad, cutting them off from reinforcements and supplies. Picture it like this. If the Germans were a pin stuck into a map, the Soviets planned to snap a giant rubber band around it. Here's how it unfolded step by step. On November 19th and 20th, Soviet forces launched their attack. They hit the German and Axis Romanian armies hard from both the north and the south of Stalingrad. These armies were not as strong as the core German forces, making them weaker targets. The Soviets used a huge number of troops, tanks, and artillery, lots and lots of firepower. The Soviets had developed a new artillery piece called the Katyusha rocket launcher, which could fire multiple rockets in rapid succession, devastating German positions. But coordinating such an attack wasn't easy. Communication lines had to be kept secret, and bad weather made moving tanks and soldiers tough. The roads were muddy and freezing, hampering both sides, but the Soviets were prepared for the harsh winter conditions. They suffered less from the cold compared to the Germans, who were not as well equipped for winter warfare. By November 23rd, the Soviet forces had executed their plan successfully, encircling about 300,000 German soldiers in what became known as the Stalingrad pocket. This was a huge problem for the Germans. They were stuck without enough food, medicine, and other supplies. The Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, tried to fly in supplies, but it wasn't enough. The harsh winter weather, combined with the Soviet anti-aircraft guns, made airdrops difficult. By February 6, 1943, the encircled German forces surrendered. This was a massive victory for the Soviet Union and a huge turning point in World War II. It was the first time Hitler's powerful army had been stopped and then defeated in large numbers, boosting Soviet morale and showing the world that Germany could be beaten. Today we care about the Battle of Stalingrad because it shifted the momentum in World War II. The Soviet victory marked the beginning of a series of defeats for Nazi Germany, leading eventually to the end of the war in Europe. It reminds us of the resilience and strategy battles can involve, changing the course of history with crucial, decisive actions. Plus, it shows how important leadership and planning are, even when the situation seems hopeless. In the fall of 1942, the city of Stalingrad became the focal point of one of the deadliest battles in World War II. This battle happened because Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, believed that capturing Stalingrad would give Germany control over the southern Soviet Union. Stalingrad was an industrial city on the Volga River, and taking it could cut off supply lines for the Soviet Union. The German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, was tasked with capturing the city. General Paulus was a German military leader, known for following orders precisely. He moved his army into Stalingrad and engaged in brutal street fighting with the Soviet forces. On the other side, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, ordered the defense of the city at all costs. He had marshals like Vasily Chuikov, who were determined to hold every inch of the city. By November 1942, though, the Germans found themselves stuck in Stalingrad. The fighting was tough, and the city was mostly rubble. Every building was a battleground, and both sides faced severe casualties. But things were about to get worse for the Germans. The Soviet Union had been planning a massive counterattack. On November 19, 1942, the Red Army, commanded by General Georgy Zhukov, launched Operation Uranus. This operation was like a sneaky move in a chess game. Soviet forces attacked the weaker Romanian and Italian armies that were protecting the German flanks, or sides, outside the city. With this clever move, they managed to surround the German Sixth Army in Stalingrad by November 23rd. The Germans, used to being the attackers, suddenly found themselves trapped. The Soviet forces encircled them like a ring of steel, preventing supplies, food, and reinforcements from getting in. This method of warfare is called a siege. The Germans tried to fly in supplies using cargo planes, but it was not enough. Imagine trying to feed thousands of soldiers with limited flights, especially when the winter was brutal and the winds were fierce. The weather made flying difficult, and many planes were shot down. General Paulus asked Hitler for permission to break out of the encirclement, but Hitler refused. He ordered Paulus to stay and fight. The situation grew desperate. The German soldiers faced dire shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Many froze or starved. Disease spread quickly among the troops. By early February 1943, the situation became unbearable. Paulus, now promoted to field marshal by Hitler to encourage him not to surrender, was cornered. But with no other choice left, he finally surrendered to the Soviet forces on February 2, 1943. Out of the nearly 300,000 soldiers in the Sixth Army, only about 91,000 survived to become prisoners of war, and many of them never returned home. This encirclement and surrender marked a turning point in the Second World War. It was the first major defeat of the German army, and it showed the world that the Germans could be beaten. This encouraged the Allies. The victory at Stalingrad also gave the Soviet Union a boost, both in morale and in military strategy, leading to future successes against the Germans. The Battle of Stalingrad matters today because it demonstrated the importance of strategic planning and the devastating nature of war. It reminds us of how human lives can be affected by decisions made far from the battlefield and how endurance and strategic thinking can change the course of history. The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point in World War II. It happened between July 1942 and February 1943. This battle was all about one city, Stalingrad, in the Soviet Union. Both sides wanted to control it, and the fight got really intense. To understand why Stalingrad was so important, we need to look back a bit. The Germans, led by Adolf Hitler, wanted to capture the city because it was a big industrial center and a gateway to the rich oil fields of the Caucasus region. This would give them the resources to keep their war machine going. On the other hand, the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, was determined not to lose the city named after him. Key people shaped what happened in the battle. Hitler made a huge mistake by splitting his forces, weakening them. Meanwhile, the Soviet side had strong leaders like Georgy Zhukov. He was a skilled general who helped create a plan to trap the German army in the city. As summer turned to winter, the battle reached its toughest phase. The German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, got bogged down in heavy fighting in the city. Stalingrad turned into a war zone, with fighting happening street by street, building by building. Soviet soldiers, along with civilians, put up fierce resistance. Meanwhile, Zhukov and the Soviets came up with a plan called Operation Uranus. They realized the Germans were vulnerable on their flanks, where they had stationed weaker Allied forces. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets attacked these flank positions, quickly breaking through. They managed to encircle the entire German Sixth Army inside Stalingrad by November 23rd. Let's talk technical stuff. The Soviets used tanks like the T-34, which were robust and worked well in snowy conditions. The Germans, however, had tanks that struggled in the winter. Both sides faced severe shortages of supplies, but it was the Germans who felt it most. The trapped soldiers ran out of food and ammunition and shared frost-bitten shelter in freezing weather. The soldiers in Stalingrad dealt with many problems. For the Germans, the harsh winter and lack of supplies made life unbearable. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers suffered from frostbite and starvation. The Soviet forces, although slightly better off, also faced cold and hunger. Civilians caught in the city had a terrible time too, struggling to find food and stay warm amidst the chaos. Ultimately, on February 2nd, 1943, the Germans in Stalingrad surrendered. By this point, over 90,000 German soldiers were prisoners, and many never returned home. The Soviets had lost a lot too, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians dead. The battle decimated the city and destroyed entire armies, changing the course of the war. So, why does this matter today? The Battle of Stalingrad is a big deal because it was the first major defeat for Nazi Germany in World War II. It showed that they weren't unbeatable. The battle also helped turn the tide in favor of the Allies on the Eastern Front. It reminds us of the cost of war, showing how tough conditions and human determination can shape history. It's a lesson about resilience, sacrifice, and how crucial decisions can have lasting impacts. Understanding this helps us think more deeply about how we approach conflicts and the value of peace in our world today. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the big turning points in World War II. To understand why it mattered, let's start with a bit of background. It's 1942, and things aren't looking great for the Allies, which included countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. The German army, led by Adolf Hitler, had been winning a lot of battles and was trying to take over Stalingrad, a city named after the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. Stalingrad was important for a few reasons. It was a big industrial city where stuff like tanks and weapons got made. Plus, it was right by the river Volga, a key route for moving goods around. Taking Stalingrad would have been a huge win for Germany and a major loss for the Soviet Union. The main players here were, on one side, Adolf Hitler and his generals, who wanted to crush Soviet resistance. On the other side, there was Joseph Stalin and his top military guy, General Vasily Chuikov, who were determined to keep the city. Chuikov was the one on the ground in Stalingrad, trying to organize the Soviet defense. As the battle kicked off in the summer of 1942, the German tactics were pretty straightforward. They used their air force to bomb the city a lot, making it hard for the Soviet army to hold their positions. Imagine the city ruins and rubble, makes moving troops and supplies really tough. But Chuikov and the Soviet army came up with a plan. They used the destroyed buildings to hide and launch surprise attacks. It was like a game of cat and mouse, but with a lot more at stake. There were plenty of challenges. German soldiers were well trained and had advanced gear, like tanks and long-range artillery. However, the Soviet soldiers were fighting on their home turf and had the advantage of knowing the terrain. The freezing Russian winter also made things brutal. The temperature dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, which is around -22 degrees Fahrenheit. This cold affected both sides, making it hard for soldiers to even hold their guns properly due to frostbite. By early 1943, the tide was turning. The Soviet Union launched a counterattack called Operation Uranus. This move surrounded the German forces, cutting them off from supplies and reinforcements. The German soldiers were stuck, cold, and running out of food. Eventually, on February 2, 1943, the German army had no choice but to surrender. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad marked a huge shift. It was the first time that the seemingly unbeatable German army had been stopped. Over 1 million people were killed or wounded in this battle, making it one of the bloodiest in history. So, why does the Battle of Stalingrad matter to us today? Well, it was a massive morale boost for the Allies. It showed that the German army could be defeated. This battle was like the beginning of the end for Germany in World War II. It helped set the stage for future Allied victories. Even now, the battle is a reminder of how a combination of strategy, determination, and fighting spirit can make a difference, no matter how tough things get. Plus, it teaches us about the importance of learning from past mistakes, understanding tactics, and sticking together when times are hard.